Jesus and the Gospels, the podcast series with Father Denis McBride. This episode was recorded in front of a live audience at Hawkstone Hall, the International Pastoral Centre. Leadership and Discipleship. Episode 5, Stories of Interaction in Ministry. Leadership in the Gospels, Part 1.
In the previous unit, that little unit of 4 lectures, dear friends, we looked at the first images of Jesus by the evangelists, and we also looked at the frame of their Gospels to get a sense of their own thinking frame of where they put the story of Jesus. And I want to now move on to reflect in these 4 units on how the evangelists celebrate the public ministry of Jesus. And it's kind of interesting to watch their style because they all, by and large, do the same. They decide that they're going to explore the person of Jesus and his ministry by telling stories of how Jesus of Nazareth interacts with different people. None of them write a creed. None of them write a dogmatic treatise about Jesus. They all believe that the best way to understand Jesus is simply to watch him interacting with other people. Dear friends, that's why you never get Jesus alone in the Gospels. There is not a page or a paragraph in the Gospels where Jesus of Nazareth is alone. Even in the wilderness, you notice, he's not alone. The evangelists say if you want to learn about Jesus, you learn about Jesus like you learn about anyone, by understanding how they actually relate to people, what they bring into their relationship, and as interestingly, of course, how do people react to Jesus when he does the things he does and when he says the things that he says? I mean, that's hardly surprising, dear friends. We learn very little about one another from staring at people. I mean, you could sit in front of someone all day and stare at them. You're not going to learn much. We learn about people by relating to them, don't we? We learn about people by watching what they do, by listening to what they actually say. So what we get in the public ministry of Jesus, in all 4 Gospels, are stories of interaction. It's not, dear friends, the gospel is not just about what Jesus does and says, is it? It's about the dynamic that he creates when he does the things he does and says the things he says. And the evangelists are equally interested in how other people react to the person of Jesus and to what he says. In other words, it's more of a drama, isn't it, than simply writing an essay on the portrait of Jesus. And by the way they tell the stories, the evangelists tell us a simple truth, that one of the principal ways you learn about Jesus is through the people who relate to him. You learn about Jesus, don't you, today in the community, don't you? Through the people who have life in his name. The people who have life in the name of Jesus are the people, aren't they, who actually lead you to the person of Jesus. So, the story of Jesus is not just about the action of God through Jesus. The story of Jesus is the story of interaction. As one theologian said, there is no Jesus available to us who's free of human fingerprints. which is a good image. That the Jesus who comes to us is a Jesus who's covered in human fingerprints. Because he never comes alone. Wherever you get Jesus in the gospel, you get a busload of supporters trying to explain him. There's those in the gospel who have life in his name. There are also those in the pages of the gospel who are profoundly threatened by Jesus and his ministry. And interestingly, the people who are mostly threatened by Jesus of Nazareth are religious people. One of the ways of trying to understand Jesus is trying to understand the question, why does Jesus make so many religious people nervous? Why at the beginning of the gospel do they start raising their eyebrows? And at the end of the gospel there is the story of crucifixion. And raising your eyebrows and crucifying someone is just a degree of opposition. If I were to write your story, if I were given the commission to write your biography, I'd have to sit down with you for a good while, wouldn't I? To try to get a sense of the shape of your story in your life. I'd try to find out what were the defining moments of your life. What were those moments in your life that have led you to be who you are today? Why have you ended up like you are today? What have been the influences in your life? And then, of course, I'd have to ask you for a list of people that I could talk to support your story. And you would give me a list of people. You would say, if you want to know about my story, it would help to talk to these people. Now, obviously, you would give me a list of your friends. But would you give me a list of your enemies? In the sense, one of the ways you understand people is through their enemies. That may sound particularly negative, but one of the things that fascinate me in the Gospels is how the evangelists take the microphone and they put it under the chin of the enemies of Jesus and they say, speak. So we listen in the Gospels not only to the voice of people who love Jesus, we also listen to the voice of people who are profoundly threatened by him, and they end up so threatened by him, they find that there's no alternative but to get rid of him. In the pages of the Gospel, dear friends, the worst supporters of Jesus are the professionally religious people. One of the things that emerges from reading the Gospels is the growing realization as you read the narrative of the Gospels, is that Jesus of Nazareth appears, it has to be said, fairly anti-clerical. You can give someone £5 for every good sentence Jesus says about religious authority, and you won't be out much money. You watch the way Jesus caricatures and cartoons the religious authority. He mocks, doesn't he, the way they dress to attract attention and to wear longer tassels than everyone else. He jokes about their need to take the seats of prominence in public places, their lust for hierarchy and prominence. He criticizes their need, doesn't he, for titles, for everyone to run around calling them rabbi. He confronts them in the way that they stay stubbornly attached to their own little traditions, doesn't he? While ignoring the word of God. And he invites them to consider a nightmare, namely that the prostitutes will walk before them into the kingdom of God. Some people ask if Jesus has a sense of humor. Try that as a liturgical procession up the aisle of the cathedral and see what people think. And one of Jesus' most telling anti-clerical jokes, of course, is the story, the parable of the Good Samaritan, where he takes the two religious people, the priest and the Levite, and he dismisses them from the story as people who have no heart or no pastoral charity. And he takes the favorite enemies of the Jewish people, a Samaritan. And we call this, don't we, the Good Samaritan. And no good Jew would put the word good in front of the Samaritan. Those are two contradictory words. They come easy to our lips because Samaritans don't mean anything in this. And one of the strong impressions you get in reading the Gospels is you watch the evangelist explore how many, many different people react differently to Jesus. And in a sense, they're trying to get us to answer the question, where do you stand in relation to him? In the pages of the Gospel, who would you be standing beside? Who would be nearest to you? Oh, I don't mean in your fantasy, but I mean really. And that's why when we talk about the beginning of Christianity, we say at the beginning of Christianity, dear friends, there stands a relationship. It's not just a person. It's something more dynamic. Some people came into contact with Jesus of Nazareth, and they were changed. Some people said, that when they came into contact with him, they experienced new life. They felt understood for the first time. They felt profoundly challenged. Other people, as we know, reacted with aggressive disapproval. So that what Jesus came to mean for the early Christian community is reflected in the pages of the Gospel. And as we keep saying, Jesus doesn't come to us alone. The only reason we have portraits of Jesus is because different communities sat down and reflected their understanding of Jesus through the pages of the Gospel. Jesus doesn't come to us directly, does he? He comes to us in that sense through the evangelist community, through their thinking of who he is. And when you look at the four Gospels, dear friends, all of them tell stories, all of them, of people who have an experience of Jesus of Nazareth. Okay. And when these people have a positive experience of Jesus of Nazareth, they begin to make claims both about themselves and about him. Some people claim because they met Jesus, they see themselves in a different way. And sometimes, dear friends, people get a different name. If your identity was you were the blind beggar who sits every day at the gate, and you meet Jesus of Nazareth, and he heals you, one of the things the community are going to have to do, aren't they, is find a new name for you. Because you're no longer the blind man who sits still begging at the entrance to the city. Why? Because you've met him. It's wonderful, dear friends, meeting somebody in your life who can help you to see yourself in a new way. And one of the things that Jesus is credited for in the Gospels is helping people see themselves in a new way. Because often, dear friends, we summarize other people by their affliction. Often we name people according to what's wrong with them. And Jesus has this strange ability of finding a new name for people that is deeper than their sorrow or their sin or their affliction. Again, it's that image of deep calling to deep. People claim that because they met him, they've got a new sense of direction in their life, a new sense of purpose. They've got a new reason to get up in the morning. Dear friends, some people in life don't have a reason to get up in the morning. So they stay in bed. And that must be a terrible way of living, not to have a sense of purpose or direction in your life, to be utterly directionless. There are stories told too of people who claim that because they met him, they look at other people differently, they look at the world differently. Jesus is forever trying to get people to look at other people differently, to look at the world differently. And he brings to people a set of values that he hopes will enable people to see people differently. That's why, dear friends, sometimes when we look at one another, we have to borrow Jesus' eyes. Sometimes when we look at one another, we're looking at one another through our own prejudice, through our own fear, sometimes even through our own hate. And the fascinating thing is, otherwise we wouldn't have a gospel, that the people who meet Jesus of Nazareth do not keep their experience to themselves. They don't keep their experience under the Official Secrets Act. Dear friends, if they did, we wouldn't have a gospel. Our gospel is very much based not only on the life of Jesus, but on the stories people told about him. Stories they told what happened when they actually met him. And they begin to make, through their experience of Jesus, this is the interesting bit, I think, they begin to make claims about him. You know, like the blind man in John's Gospel. He doesn't know who Jesus is. But by the end of the story, his experience of being healed, do you see the point, leaves him open to the identity of this man. If someone comes along and heals you, and you have been blind all your life, you're going to become interested in the identity of the one who healed you, aren't you? The obvious question is, given what has happened to me, who is he? Who is this man? Is he just a man? Is he a prophet? Is he the Messiah? Who on God's earth is he? In other words, the evangelists tell us something simple. You're going to learn about Jesus in the gospel through the people who have life in his name. And these people, dear friends, some of them whom are very strange, are going to become our teachers. There are two different worlds in the gospel. There is the world where people experience religious authority, the authority of the chief priests and the scribes. And then there is another world which is much more radical, the world of the authority of experience. Namely, the people who have met Jesus, who feel changed by him in some way, and that change gives them an authority. And you watch them convert this experience into gospel and offer it to other people as good news. Now, it seems to me this is modern. This is quite a modern shift. Since the 1960s, certainly in the West, experience has gained new authority in the way that people actually think. More and more people today are becoming their own centers of moral authority, rather than objective codes or law. Many people today are using their own experience as a guiding source of wisdom. Dear friends, when we talk about experience, if you go for a job, one of the first things people say to you is, have you got any experience? Experience means learning through time, doesn't it? If you've got experience, it means that you've been there. And experience means learning through direct contact with people and things. And many people today are moving away from an automatic respect for authority to an instinctive respect for their own experience and judgment. And dear friends, that's quite a dramatic shift, isn't it? Today, certainly in the West, authority, whether it's political or religious, has to earn people's respect before it is acknowledged or heeded. In some countries today, respect for authority is still almost automatic. Dear friends, that has almost gone in the West. Authority figures are not automatically respected because they are the authority. In today's world, certainly in the West, authority has to earn before it is heeded. And there's a dramatic shift. I've tried to put it like this, dear friends. If you look in the religious world of today and you ask yourself, who are the teachers? If you look in the world of Buddhism, if you look in the world of Christianity, if you look in the world of Judaism, if you look in the world of Islam, by and large in the religious world, most teachers are male and they're clerics. Most of them. And then there's a rest. In the Anglican Communion, in some parts of it, there are now obviously women clerics, and we're privileged to have two here, but very much still in a minority. By and large, in most religious worlds, the teachers are male clerics. And then there's the rest of us. If you look in the gospel world and you ask yourself the question, who do the evangelists set before you as your teacher? Who do you learn from in the gospel? There isn't, dear friends, one single male cleric among them. Not one. The evangelists put before us as our teachers a group of people who are either wounded or they're little. And then there's the rest. The evangelists tell us a simple truth, that, dear friends, that you can learn from anybody. That anyone can be your teacher. It doesn't have to be a male cleric. I mean, just pause a moment on this one and ask yourself, who are the people in the gospel the evangelists put before you? And dear friends, most of them are highly unlikely characters who play the role of teacher. One of the characters early on in John's gospel is this fascinating woman of Samaria. Now, that story you can read at all sorts of theological depths, but there's a level of taking it as John wrote it. A man meets a woman at a well on the edge of the wilderness. And the conversation nearly never happens because the woman objects to the idea that a conversation should happen. When she says to Jesus, but I'm a woman and you're a man. I'm a Samaritan and you're a Jew. Why are you asking me for a drink? Give me a drink. Why do you ask for a drink? Because you're thirsty. And there's a level where thirst makes friends of us all. And you watch this woman looking at this man, thinking that this man is not very well up on theological difference. He must be a wee bit of a simpleton. Why? Because this conversation shouldn't be happening. Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. And then he says, he tries to intrigue her about his identity. If you only knew who it was who was asking you, you'd be asking me. Now, this woman doesn't know who this man is from Adam. But there's one man she does know. Jacob. Because this is Jacob's well, and Jacob is her ancestor and patriarch. Dear friends, sitting behind this story, there is the most beautiful story out of the Old Testament about the patriarch Jacob. Remember, he was the son of Isaac. We pray the great patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jacob was looking for a wife. And he said to Isaac, Abba, I'm going to look for a wife. And Isaac says, well, that's fine. There's a lot of fine-looking young women around in the village. Big, strong women, farmers' daughters, ideal. And Jacob says, well, Abba, I was looking for something a little more delicate. And he says, Abba, I need to go away and search for a wife. Because none of the girls in the village, however strong and strapping they may be, fits into my world. And Isaac says, well, hurry, be back for harvest time. And when you come back, bring a strong woman. Because remember, that's what your wife will have to do. Your wife will spend all her time out in the fields. There are two big qualifications for a wife, according to Isaac. Strong back and big hands. Isaac is utter pragmatic. See, remember, Isaac is a very kind father. Isaac never forgot the day when his father took him for a walk. And he ended up staring at a knife. And he said, I will never do that to my sons. Isaac would remember the time when after that Abram would say to him, son, do you want to go for a walk? And Isaac would say, take the dog. So, I mean, you've got this image of Isaac being very kind to his sons. So he gives Jacob permission, and he travels village through village through village, and he comes to a well at the edge of the wilderness. And when he's at the well, he notices the most beautiful, delicate girl he has ever seen in his life. She is so stunningly beautiful, he starts to cry. And when this young woman comes to the well with her sheep, she's never seen such a handsome man in all her life. So what does she do? She starts to cry. It's in the book. And there's two people at a well making their own water. And she says, my name is Rachel. What's your name? He says, Jacob. He says, the sheep look very thirsty. Can I give some water to the sheep? She said, you're very kind. She said, would you like to see my father? He said, gosh, I'd love to see your father. She says, come. And the poor sheep go away thirsty. They never get a drink from the well. And the old father, who's a very clever old devil, watches these two young lovers come to his house. He doesn't have to be a genius when he looks at them. Their body language is leaking all over the landscape. And he comes up and he says, you met Rachel. He says, yes. He says, you must meet her elder sister, Leah. Big, strong woman. I'll call her in from the fields. He calls Leah in, and Leah comes and shakes hands with Jacob. And Jacob has only eyes for Rachel, and the father can see that. He said, you want to marry Rachel? Jacob said, I would love to marry your daughter. He said, fine, forget cows and goats and sheep. He says, you work for me for 7 years, okay? 7 years, and Rachel will be yours. Now, Jacob is the first romantic in the Bible. The Bible says, for Jacob, those 7 years were like a day. Like a day. He was so much in love with Rachel. And of course, when the wedding came, and Jacob professed publicly that he would love this woman forever, and then she lifts her veil to be kissed, of course, it's the wrong sister. It's Leah. Daddy planted Leah there. And Jacob turns to his new father-in-law, and he says, you've cheated me. He says, no, son. He says, in our culture, you must always give away the elder daughter first. He said, you have to be enculturated these days. Have you heard about enculturation? And Jacob said, I've just had a seminar on it. He said, it's okay, son, work for me another 7 years, and Rachel will be yours, and you'll have 2 wives. He agrees. The first romantic in the Bible. And when he marries Rachel, there are no veils, which is why down to this day, at a Jewish wedding, there are no veils permitted to cover the face. He's got 2 wives. Both of them are barren. So what do? They give him their most beautiful servant girls to sleep with. He doesn't object. Dear friends, this guy's got 2 wives and 2 mistresses. He never had a cold night in his life. And then one day Rachel is pregnant and she gives birth to a son called Joseph. Okay? And he's different from all the rest. He dresses in technicolor clothes. They all dress in brown. He sees things they don't see. He can interpret dreams. And they get very jealous of him. So the brothers take him to the well. They throw him down into this well. And when he's at the bottom of the well, he listens to his brothers having a community meeting. He's on the agenda. What the hell are they going to do with him? And they sell him to Egypt, this useless dreamer. And this useless dreamer ends up saving the lives of all of them when he invites them to Egypt. The old man Jacob on his deathbed calls Joseph and he says, "Son, I'm going to give you the most precious possession I have." Guess what it is? It's the well where I met your mother, Rachel. Now, in the tradition, Jacob's well was the well for lovers. That's where you would go in the hope, if you were Jacob, you would find your Rachel. That's the story sitting there at the background of this meeting. A man and a woman meet at a lover's well. How many lovers have you had? 5, 6? I mean, try that over lunch to the person opposite as a way of opening up a conversation. And you watch this woman get angry, understandably, being probed about her sex life. She's already had 5 husbands. I mean, this woman is a sexual athlete. Psychologists would say today she's got a pathological incapacity for sustaining relationships. You know, she doesn't seem to be able to stick with anyone, or else they're not able to stick with her. Men who tiptoe out of your life after they've got what they wanted. That's the story of her life. Nobody has taken her seriously or loved her for long. She's a woman who's been dumped. She's a woman who's been left. A woman who clearly, in our terms, is a woman who is abused and left. And this woman who's dying to meet her Jacob, somebody who's going to take her seriously and stay with her longer than a weekend, is confronted by this man in John's Gospel, who leaves his own disciples only one commandment: love one another as I have loved you. You've got a woman who is desperate for love and attention, to be taken seriously. And she meets the great teacher of love at Jacob's well. And when Jesus gets closer to her identity, her sexual identity, watch what she does. She says, your fathers worship in the temple in Jerusalem, and our fathers worship up there on the mountain. Where is the proper place to worship? Jesus is talking about her sex life, and she wants to have a seminar on liturgy. You know, sometimes when people get close to who you really are, you become afraid. Because sometimes we think if people really knew us for who we really are, they could never love us. So we keep ourselves secret. And we walk through life like a mobile secret, scared that nobody would really love somebody like us. And yet the extraordinary thing about this man and this woman This man is trying to face the truth. He's not condemning her. It's as if he says, well, if you want to talk about liturgy, wherever you worship, you have to worship in spirit and in truth. You have to worship in your own truth. You can't leave yourself at the holy water font and walk into church. What walks into church if you leave yourself there? Who you are in all the mess and the mix is what worships. And you watch Jesus getting closer and closer and closer to this woman. And you watch the woman eventually allowing him to get closer. Because she's met a man who's introduced her to herself. She's met a man who doesn't abandon her and leave her in a heap of pain. A man who actually cares about her. And when she goes back to the village, she calls the villagers together to tell the story. She doesn't keep her experience a secret. And you can almost hear her shouting in the village, "Oh, I met a man." And people saying, "Oh God, not another one." And she said, "No, I met a man." Can you imagine meeting a man who knows everything about you but still accepts you? Gosh, what a man. And she wants her own community to meet this man too and bring him home before he disappears forever. She becomes the evangelist to the community. And John finishes the gospel of that story. Many Samaritans of that town believed in him on the strength of her testimony. She said, "He told me all I have ever done." So when the Samaritans came up to him, they begged him to stay with them. He stayed for 2 days, and he spoke to them. Many more came to believe. And they said to the woman, "Now we no longer believe because of what you said. We have heard him ourselves." In other words, they go into their own relationship with Jesus. Her experience of Jesus gives her authority, dear friends. That's her authority. I met a man who told me everything about myself. Most of us would be horrified by that, but she is not horrified by that. Now, dear friends, if you were on the parish council and you were advertising for a director of religious education, and you asked people to bring a little page of a curriculum vitae with them, just something about their past life, and she comes in, and you look down at the curriculum vitae, you'd probably only have 2 words to say. "Next, please." You say, what qualifications has that woman got to speak about Jesus? And she says, "I met him, I heard him, I spoke to him, and he's changed my life." That's my authority. Not because she's got a degree in theology. This is what I mean when I say the authority of experience in the gospel. When that woman speaks about Jesus, she consults her experience, not a book. And it's out of that experience that she speaks about Jesus of Nazareth to other people. Is that making sense? In other words, I want to deliberately pause for a wee bit on that one, because in a sense, it's fairly shocking when you look at the characters the evangelist put before you, and they say, take notes from her, or take notes from him. Because these are people who, in spite of being wounded or stupid or desperate, they've got something to say to us about him. And that something is at the heart of their own experience.
While listening to these recordings, you might want to have the book Jesus and the Gospels beside you. You can order your copy at www.rpbooks.co.uk or find the ebook for your smart device. Thank you for joining Redemptorist Publications on this journey with Jesus and the Gospels.